Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's LinkedIn Live on Decoding Age. I'm Susan Wiles-Schwartz, Director of Communications at the Global Coalition on Aging. And in this session, we're asking an age-old question that has perhaps never been more relevant than it is today, in 2021, on the United Nations International Day of Older Persons. How do we crack the code to healthy aging? Over the 20th century, incredible medical, scientific, and social advancements have helped us increase life expectancy from just 40 or 50 years old in 1900 to where a child born today can reasonably expect that they might live to 100. So that begs the question, how can medical innovations help us live better, not just longer, but stronger and healthier lives? How do we ensure that even as more of us all around the globe can hope to see 100, that our health spans, our years of healthy lives, are keeping pace with these longer lifespans? We're joined here today by three experts to try to begin to answer that. Dr. Mike Devoy is the Chief Medical Officer for Bayer AG and Executive Vice President of Medical Affairs and Pharmacovigilance for Bayer's Pharmaceutical Division. Mike, I've got a pretty big question for you to kick this off. It's no secret that we're in the midst of a massive demographic shift around the world with nearly 2 billion people over 60 years of age. And already today, some countries have more older adults than they do younger people. Our longevity is a tremendous achievement, but even as we enjoy longer lives, we find ourselves facing different health challenges, so-called conditions of aging, many of which are chronic and a person might live with for many, many years. So my big question is this. What do you see as the potential promise of medical innovation for this aging world?
Thanks, Susan. It is a great pleasure for me to be here with everyone today on this important day. And as you said, since 1900, we've seen a doubling of average life expectancy in our societies. And that's a really wonderful thing, that we can live longer and enjoy our lives and families and experiences. And that's been thanks to a lot of scientific breakthroughs and research over the years. But now, really our focus is how can we have healthy lives and healthy aging and live better and longer. And I really see science, medicine is the way we'll make that happen. And I also believe we're at an exciting time at the moment, because for decades, a lot of our work has been about managing the symptoms, treating diseases when they're already pretty severe, and really helping people cope with that. And I think we're now at a time when we start to think we can really impact on the underlying causes of a lot of diseases, with particularly areas such as cell and gene therapy. And some are calling this the time of a biorevolution, where we bring together those advances in cell biology and basic understanding of disease with high-powered computing, artificial intelligence, and that really helps us address more fundamentally the basics of disease. And then the other part of that is helping people not get sick in the first place by enabling them to take better care of their health and condition and general well-being before they get sick. So it's a combination of having better technologies to treat and reverse serious conditions that come as we get older, and at the same time try to help as many of us as possible prevent even entering those situations.
Thank you. I think there's so much going on, I think, in medical innovation right now. It's really inspiring, and I hope we can get to a lot of these pieces today. Our next guest today, Dr. Lothar Roessig, is the Clinical Development Group Head for Cardiology and Nephrology in Bayer's Pharmaceuticals Division. He's a cardiologist by training who is now at the forefront of future medical innovations. Lothar, Mike described, I think, a really powerful vision of what can be possible and sort of where we're headed. But I mean, surely it isn't easy for us to get there. Can you speak about some of the main challenges in R&D for developing and approving innovative therapies for societies that just keep getting older and older?
Right, and thanks for having me here. Hello. Yeah, I think there is a huge opportunity, and Mike Devoy pointed it out. I think one main challenge remains the awareness to really recognize the potential that is coming up. with all the biotechnology, with the digitalization, especially remote options for patients to even engage in self-management in close collaboration with the physicians, of course, and to better make this understand and see how these opportunities can be leveraged, increase this awareness. That's central, and let's not forget. Perhaps what's the true main challenge here is it's the enormous burden that comes along with the aging society. Larger parts of the population now at ages where cardiorenal diseases become manifest. And of course, this huge burden should not be accepted. It should not be taken as inevitable at the end of the life. You should not accept that quality goes down and exercise capacity. This should now be seen as an opportunity to improve. With 75, you should expect a life that may have been usually the case with 65 decades ago. So this awareness is something where we try to work on, and that will enable to make best use of this tremendous opportunity.
Thank you. I mean, I absolutely agree. I think you've touched on some of the most important points. You think about all of the time at the Global Coalition on Aging. So with that, I want to introduce our third guest today is my colleague, Mike Hodin, CEO of the Global Coalition on Aging and managing partner at High Lantern Group. He's also a fellow at Oxford University's Harris Manchester College and has spoken internationally on the topic of aging, including at the G20, APEC, Davos, and the World Knowledge Forum. Mike Hodin, at GCOA, you have the privilege of having a very global view on all of this, looking at the nexus of business, policy, and how the global megatrend of aging is driving innovative thinking and action. What do you see as the most exciting frontier for the future of innovation that could improve people's health spans?
Thank you, Susan. And I, too, would like to say it's a delight to be here. A pleasure to be here with Mike Devoy, an old friend, and Lothar Roessig, who we've just met. So perhaps I could offer a little bit of our perspective from the Global Coalition on Aging as we celebrate International Day of Older Persons, where the theme that the United Nations has chosen is health equity for all ages. Now, there are a few elements in that are very pronounced. One is for all ages. It's not a small point that the UN and the WHO are recognizing the needs around older people, and that these are needs that are across the life course. As has already been said, innovation for treatment that we've seen through the biomedical world is critical, but innovation for prevention is just as important. And we see that through biomedical innovation. We also see it through the partnership with technology, so digital equity for all ages. And particularly over these last 2 years with the pandemic, as we've oftentimes been limited to be at home, we see that the explosion of digital health technology is really now part of our lives. So innovation comes in many forms, and it has been driving this revolution of longevity we now live with. Biomedical innovation, as we heard, elements there related to intellectual property and access of the medicines themselves to all people. Innovation in technology, digital health, where it can be used from telehealth and telemedicine to remote patient monitoring at home, not just at the hospital, to application in clinical trials that, of course, Lothar alluded to, and innovation in other areas as well, such as caregiving, for example, where we now see that caregivers are a critical part of our health system. So we are delighted to be here and joining you, Mike Devoy and Lothar, with Bear to celebrate the International Day of Older Persons and to highlight this importance of innovation in achieving healthy aging, which is at the cornerstone of the decade of healthy aging we've now launched in 2021. Thank you very much for that question.
Thanks, Mike. It's really fantastic. I'm going to take this back to you, Mike Devoy, to really build on some of those things that Mike was talking about and those ideas. What types of digitally driven innovations excite you most in terms of their potential to sort of help us fight these conditions of aging that people are experiencing, or even just to live better and better manage the chronic diseases we have?
Thanks, Susan. I think Mike set the topic up very well in terms of health equity all and digital health equity for all. And one of the things we see as we get older is that we have to manage sometimes quite complex medical situations, take care of different parts of the healthcare system to help people. And more, we want to take control of our own healthcare prevention. And using digital, to me, is going to be a critical part of achieving that. We've seen how we can accelerate that in this pandemic time, as Mike Hodin referred to. And we really believe that this is going to be a critical part of how we empower people in the future. And by that I mean that you may have a condition, you may get given a prescription for one of the medicines that Lothar's developed, but to really make that work properly in healthcare, you need all the other services. You need to be perhaps measuring your weight regularly, measuring your blood sugar, getting advice from other healthcare professionals, not just doctors, but social workers, nurses, nutritionists, and also really following your own healthcare. So we believe that providing something we call integrated care that puts the patient, the healthy individual at the center, and then is always giving you advice, help, input in a way and at a pace that's ideal for you, is how we can really address these many chronic conditions that we will inevitably face as our populations get older. So it's really using digital in the concept of integrated care that's going to do that. And just one example, Bayer does collaborate. We have a collaboration with a company called OneDrop that started its work in the area of diabetes, and now with us is venturing into providing these sort of solutions in areas like oncology, cardiovascular, and women's healthcare. So that's sort of a summary of where I see digital can really help provide us with a sustainable form of healthy aging.
Thank you. I think that's really fascinating. So interesting to hear. I think hopefully we'll all have to check that out as soon as this is over. And I just wanted to take a moment then to pause, because I think a lot of these ideas that we're talking about of how sort of health is and prevention and staying healthy is, really at the center of everything that we're all doing. I think a lot of these ideas are resonating with people who are here today in the audience watching our conversation. And we'll invite them. I would like to invite them all and everyone to, submit questions that you have and any thoughts you have at the end of this session. We will hope to take questions from you, and I'd love to hear from you about kind of what you're thinking, what are your reactions, and what questions you have about these. So coming up next, Lothar, thinking about sort of cardiovascular disease, heart failure, cardiorenal disease. These are all pretty common, I think, chronic and age-related diseases, and increasingly common. But I think they loom quite large in terms of both burden, but also fear in public imagination. I'm curious, where do you see the most potential promise for innovation in these areas specifically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for this question. I think there may be two conditions that I could think of where we see, on one hand, particular need for innovation, and where also some first promising solutions may come up. One is worsening chronic heart failure. You mentioned heart failure, and in some patients this stays stable under available therapies. But in about a third of those patients, despite these advances in stable treatment, there will be worsening of the condition. That might be shortness of breath, difficult to breathe. You may realize your mom, your dad wouldn't even make one flight of stairs any longer without getting breathless. And then there are hospitalizations needed, sometimes really urgently. And it's not just this periodically bad condition of the patient. It's actually a prognostic sign of subsequent unfavorable outcomes. That means high death rates even in that condition, and recurrent needs again for hospital admissions. And this despite those therapies that manage rather well the stable condition. And here we see a particular need, and also to recognize this as a condition where those new options that are coming up can actually be used and help to treat patients better. As another condition, I'd like to mention chronic kidney disease. Chronic kidney disease means that there is a loss of the function of the kidneys. They are needed to maintain the right fluid status of your body, and that means over longer term, fluid may accumulate, even requiring replacement of the kidney function. But that's the final stages. What is also very important is that even in the earlier stages, it's a prognostic sign that cardiovascular risk will be higher. And so in a way, if you think about it, it's of course threatening to see the renal function worsening, but it's also an opportunity to start early treatment. And I think I heard this already in the beginning from Mike Devoy. There is now an increasing opportunity to use our new options early on for the prevention of the disease, for the prevention of those complications, and the onset of cardiovascular disease. And for this reason, chronic kidney disease, especially in patients with other risk factors, with diabetes, is an important sign to make use of preventive treatments, and this way avoid that later on the disease burden will set on.
Thank you. I was thinking as you're talking, a lot about, innovations in the places where they are once people are already sick or they're in the hospital. And I know that, a lot of, hopefully a lot of our lives, even with chronic conditions, take place, at home and are just sort of managing the day to day. And I was wondering what you see, just as a follow up, like what is the role that digital technology, for example, could play to help people improve their quality of life that are living with these conditions, just, as they go about, and they're not necessarily in a crisis at that moment, but want to continue to live well.
Yeah, that's an important point. There's a huge potential. We call these devices wearables, so those that can be at the place where the patient is. And if we think about preventing disease, that is not in the hospital yet, as you point out. That's in patients all day living. That's at home or wherever they are. And with new technology, with digital technology, we may have options to be there where the patient can enjoy their quality of life, where we can measure it, where we can make sure it is what it should be or what it can be, and also to see whether something is coming up that we have to treat, that we have to prevent. So the role of wearables, of digital remote technology, is a huge potential. And paradoxically, if you will, the COVID-19 pandemic actually taught us interesting lessons, how this can be leveraged, and we made quite some progress that was needed when patients couldn't come to hospitals, that this works quite well. There is still a steep learning curve, so we're not there yet, but the potential is tremendous, and I'm sure that this will be the future of medicine, a close interaction between drugs, pharmacology, and digital technology.
That's amazing. I think it's such a fascinating vision. I'm going to just zoom out here for a second. I am thrilled that we have over 2,000 people in this conversation right now, and we are talking to over 30 different countries. So I just wanted to sort of take that international view. And the next question to Mike Hodin. GCOA recently published a report on the burden of heart failure on societies. I'm curious, how are different countries addressing this massive need for innovation in heart failure and cardiovascular disease in general? Are there any major differences that you're seeing?
Thanks for that question, Susan. And let me answer it a little bit, to be honest, a little bit obliquely. I'll come back to some of the countries in a moment, but maybe to start, and also to pick up on one of the questions I saw in the chat, where someone said, when should we start applying healthy aging? The short answer is as young as possible. As the decade of healthy aging from the World Health Organization and its relationship to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals was just launched in 2021. So for those of us who are over 55 or over 60 today, there's one application to the idea of healthy aging. For our children and grandchildren and those not yet born, healthy aging can start very early. So therefore, coming to your country questions, Japan, which refers to themselves as super aging, not only because they have so much longevity, many people over 60 today, but because of their low birth rates, they have more old than young, to the point where in a few years, they'll have close to 40% of their population over 60. Well, health systems invented in the 1960s, improved in the 70s and 80s, have to be reformed in order to apply to this new demographic era. And application for prevention is utterly critical. So a super aging Japan, or many in Europe, from Germany to the UK, Finland, who are also with older populations, old as a percentage of old to young, are stepping up to these, and certainly cardiovascular health is one of the central ones. The last point I'd like to make, and it relates to some of the points that Mike Devoy and Lothar you were referring to. One of the barriers to healthy aging, which is recognized in the WHO Decade of Healthy Aging, is what we refer to as ageism. And in fact, there are 4 areas of focus at the Decade of Healthy Aging: integrated care, long-term care, age-friendly communities, but also ageism. And the first report out of the decade, out of the WHO, is on the absolute need to change this culture of ageism. Let me give you an example of that. It's about the assumptions that we have as we age, not just the healthcare system, our healthcare professionals, our caregivers, but we ourselves. And heart failure, in many ways, unfortunately, is a perfect example. Lothar, you referred to the idea of having trouble breathing, or for example, feeling tired, as early conditions of recognizing heart failure. Too often, those conditions are conflated with, well, she's 78, and that's what happens when you get to be 78. You get shortness of breath, or you become tired. No, she has a disease, and it's called heart failure. And Mrs. Smith herself doesn't even recognize that. Her adult daughter, her healthcare professional may not. So one of our great barriers to achieving this prevention that we're looking for, that then leads to the better earlier detection, the better monitoring, and the treatment, is this ageism culture, where we ourselves are assuming that, as we age, well, these are automatic conditions. We know that about Alzheimer's. We're starting to change that, but well, we call a senior moment. No, it's the beginning of, having a disease. Heart failure is another perfect example there, where we conflate the conditions of a disease with, well, she's 78 or 82, and that's what happens when you get to that age. And so we have to really address the culture of ageism as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Mike. I think that's a really, really important reminder of the ways that the solutions that we're looking for and the innovations and getting to that next place is going to require sort of work on the part of everyone and a lot of collaboration. So I actually had a question I wanted to put out to all 3 of you, or whoever wants to take it, thinking about all of the parties that need to be involved. What are some of the best examples you've seen, or even aspirational examples of cross-sector collaborations between industry and government or global institutions to bring to help solve these problems, to bring age-friendly technologies to older adults and bring these innovations to people where they are? Let's see if there's any takers.
I'm happy to take a step, and this lets me think of consortia where we are happy to engage with together with other industry partners, but especially academia, and you named authorities, federal agencies interested in working together. And that's because the true power of the data we collect on new, for example, new laboratory findings, we call those omics, when the genes are characterized, when the circulating markers in the bloodstream are characterized. And the true power of all this data collection comes up when the data set is very large. So I think we need to collaborate here. And this will yield new insights. What comes on top is not only this interaction between various stakeholders, as you named, but also between technologies. It's not only the classic medical laboratory diagnostics. Now it's also wearables, like I said, to measure, for example, physical activity, like those fitness trackers that you know from your daily life. They would actually come to play, those smart watches that can count steps, and maybe other instruments, especially also imaging. And with the new arrivals of artificial intelligence, we are increasingly able in large data sets to analyze the information that comes along and find patterns. And in collaboration, those who would enable large data sets in this collaboration, we hope we learn more and will actually see soon tremendous progress here.
And Susan, maybe I just add to that, since my code can't say this, but I actually think the work that GCOA did, to me, is a standout example of how you need to address this problem. And I'm not just saying this in the because I said this in our when we met earlier in our private discussion, because aging is not a unidimensional. It's not about, we need to fix the heart disease or the Parkinson's disease, but we need to look at this in such a multi-dimensional way. So that's why there are so many partners that come to this from the pharmaceutical sector, from other parts of healthcare, from the financial services, from other technology spaces, because I think only by bringing all those great expertise together with, and also with public institutions and government and healthcare systems, are we really going to make this work in a way which is, really achieves what we can dream of, but also in a way that's sustainable for society and all of us. So I really commend the GCOA for the work you do.
Well, thank you, Mike. We will take that. But as a partner, we're all doing this together, of course. And I'll give a few examples like that. We did this video, which is now public, that brought together Bayer, Uber through their Uber Health business, Sanofi on their vaccine, adult vaccine for flu issue, and Philips, their connected care business. And you together talked about solutions that range from biomedical innovation, then how do you connect it better through the use of digital health? How do we track the data? The Sanofi is talking about better applications for flu, and Uber providing transportation so that is not a barrier to better health. So the combination is really critical. We had our Silver Economy Forum in Helsinki a couple of years ago, and you, Mike, directly were on stage with financial leaders from Finland, along with the CEO of Home Instead, Jeff Huber. So the relationships there were very, very interesting. So the cross collaboration is utterly critical. I saw a chat question about diet. Again, nutritional health is so important, and that's also in the decade of healthy aging. So this collaboration is really critical. And what we all have to do is take that collaboration into reforms for the health system itself. And the last point I would make on this is to, I think, in many ways, and as Lothar alluded to earlier, in some ways, ironically, a very good example of cross-sector, cross-discipline collaboration is precisely the pandemic. Tragic, we're not through it yet, but the idea of scientific advancement, particularly the mRNA science that has led to these new vaccines, are not enough if you don't have the access and scalability. And we believe from a global coalition point of view that it's important to recognize Bayer, for example, it's not just the biomedical innovation, however central and critical that is, but it's the partnership that companies like Bayer have to help scale and ensure access, and through that achieve the kind of equity that we're all looking for. A great innovation out of the laboratory is just the beginning, and barely the beginning. And the ability to scale this, to get it to people, the vaccination rollout we saw in places like Israel, that were the basis in many ways for a new kind of clinical trial almost. Fascinating. So I think there's a lot of really good lessons out of this tragedy of the COVID-19 pandemic as well.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, of course, couldn't agree more. I think this has been a huge learning experience. We're nearing the end of our time here in this session and cross over the hour. We're going to turn it over to the audience for your questions. But before I do so, I have a final question for the two scientists here. Coming back to the title of this session, how can we crack the code to healthy aging? Do you think, will science ever be able to achieve this goal? Lothar, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I'll dare. And of course, there is a way to go to fully deceive it, but I think we are making progress, and I think it's exactly important to recognize. It sounds like a quite ambitious goal to decipher the code of aging, but I think we are getting closer to it. Our instruments, our methodology improves. We have powerful tools in our hands nowadays. Everything will come to full fruition if we collaborate on it. It's not something that one on their own does, but we need to collaborate across patients and doctors, across agencies and all institutions that play a role here. And with this, I guess there is the methodology now coming up that will help us to get closer. I would like to point out that it all will not necessarily only yield drugs, new drugs that are helpful, but also the interplay with a healthy lifestyle. So that is where the environment, where the drugs will come to full fruition. And so still skeptic to promise too much that we will have the full code in our hands very soon, but I think we are getting closer.
Thank you. And Mike Devoy, the final word on this?
I'll be brief because I think Lothar spoke very eloquently and very accurately. So I'm an optimist. I think science will help us solve this. And but I think also reflecting back what Mike Hodin said, and also Bayer as a company has a vision of health for all and hunger for none. This is something we need to make sure we can make sustainable around the world, and keep working at it. I don't think I envisage this as a few months or a few years, but I think with the science we have in our hands and with the right collaborations, I truly believe this is realistic.
Susan, from a layman's point of view, I would add to that in many ways we've already begun to crack the code. It's not too long ago, mid-20th century, that the average lifespan was barely more than 40 or 50. Now a child born today is likely to live to 100. It's not bad. We want to have a healthy 100 years life, and that's a lot of what we've talked about. But the point that I guess from a layman's point of view I would emphasize is that some of the core conditions that got us from let's say roughly age 40 to 50 to 100, that we also want to make sure the entire world has access to, like intellectual property, like the access to these innovations, the support for the scalability through, this cross-sector array of innovative companies, and the combination of digital caregiving and biomedicine. Let's not forget how important those have been in this first part of our fight to get to this longevity, and we have to have those and other elements in the second part of the fight to get a healthier longevity.
Thank you. Absolutely. I just want to thank all three of you. This has been really, really fantastic conversation. I hope everyone has enjoyed it. I want to take a couple of moments that we have left and really turn to a few of the questions that I've seen come in from the people watching today. We've talked a lot about, the technologies and the potential. I think it's really exciting, but there's sort of a critical piece, which is, making sure that those technologies get into the hands of the people who need them, or we're able to find them. So I had a question from Federica Genovese, sort of asking, how do we find the patients that are at higher risk of progressing in both heart disease and kidney disease? How do we know who they are?
So that sounds like one for Lothar, if I can pass it to my colleague, but happy to step in as well.
Yeah, well, it's a good point. And it's actually a rather trivial lab test that helps to identify patients with chronic kidney disease. Of course, it's important that this lab test will be taken, and then the interpretation and the identification of those at risk is rather straightforward. Technology will still help us to make it easier, more convenient for patients, not to have an appointment at a clinic far away, but to use remote technology also for lab tests. For the heart, it's a combination, probably a bit more of several factors. And the question of time is here in particular important, because many of these tests would not be routinely done, like, for example, an echo exam of the heart, but it needs some trigger. And I think to identify new markers that would get you to undergo this type of imaging are needed. And this is an area of further research. I can reassure you that once the imaging has to be done, it's a harmless method. It's done by echocardiography, so it's not a radiation or anything, and that will then be very powerful to identify those at risk for heart failure.
Thank you. The next question I have, Mike, I think you touched on or referenced briefly, it's sort of asking about, the role of diet in aging. But I would also add to that, when we've talked about some of the innovations here, is where, not just the role of diet in aging, which we know is quite important, and I hope we'll talk about, but are there some innovations on the space? And I think this is a thing that people around the world have struggled with historically and continue to struggle with. Are there some interesting innovations, either technological or otherwise, that are on the horizon, or that you think could be that could help with this?
So I'll try, and then maybe look to my colleagues as well, because I would start with the disclaimer. I'm not a nutritional expert, but what we clearly see is that having a healthy and balanced diet is a critical part of staying healthy throughout life. And someone asked about, when does healthy aging start? I think it even starts before you're born, because we know ensuring a mother, is healthy in pregnancy actually has impact on that baby's born life for the rest of their existence. So I think first is just ensuring people can get access to the right nutrition in the right way, consistently, and that will play a big part in helping with healthy aging. We know, it's clearly diseases like diabetes, which are a big burden as we get older, that they're addressable by getting to a healthier weight very often, eating the right things. I think we all like to think, is there one thing we eat once a day that will, make everything great, and we can then, go and have, eat 6 chocolate cakes and not worry about it. I think that I'm not so sure about. We probably may get to some interventions in the future, but I think the first steps are just helping people, eat and know what to eat in the right way. And I think that's also part of the assistance from some of the integrated care approaches. But I maybe ask my colleagues here what thoughts they have on that topic.
Yeah, I would, again, as a layman, frankly, but to use Mike Devoy's point earlier, from a global coalition point of view, we have the technology companies and Intel or Philips. We have a number of pharma companies like Bayer or Novartis or Pfizer as examples. We also have a company named Nutrition, which is owned by Danone, and nutritional health is their expertise. They have what's referred to as medical nutrition, so they're developing products all the time. And it's also not surprising that one of the areas that was in the original report and then the strategy that led to the Decade of Healthy Aging, which every one of the 194 governments at the World Health Assembly approved to lead to this launch of the Decade of Healthy Aging, that nutritional health was very much a part of that. So it is well recognized. Doing more, we have the ability through, I digress for a second. We think of three sort of revolutions that are with us today. One is this biomedical revolution around innovation. The second is the aging revolution itself, longevity. And then the third is the information revolution. Now, we know there's a lot of information out there one has to be careful about, but there is an ability today, this is a good example, our talk right now, to get information to people on a regular basis. And nutrition is certainly something we can manage as individuals in addition to the healthcare system.
Thanks, Mike. I have another question, unless Lothar, you wanted to add in on this. No. So I had another question from the audience. They said they're curious about what you think about future technologies like virtual personalized clinical trials and as that relates to aging.
And here, I guess I feel in the position to address for our clinical development and also beyond. So for those groups who are interested then to learn more about the drugs once they are approved and in use, this is a very important and interesting field. And I'd like to point out that it's not just the classic trial that we used to conduct versus maybe any fully virtual, but it's in between a whole range of more pragmatic approaches. We know that for the patient friendliness of our trials, we are eager to simplify and make use of those new methodology. We know that still some elements like randomization, so that there is it's by chance what type of treatment would be given, the blinding or masking of treatments. Those principles may remain at certain stages important, but on the other hand, we have to have an open mind to see how can we simplify. And there is a lot going on in terms of leveraging remote conduct of certain procedures, ease the burden for patients not to come too frequently to the hospital. And ultimately, we are also towards the more extreme forms, like a fully virtual personalized clinical trial. We do see this as an option, and at certain stages of the full life cycle of our drug development and later continuation of the evidence generation with these drugs, we would consider this a very important element.
Thank you.
I would, Mike Devoy, I don't know if you wanted to take that. I was going to say something which I can say from a global coalition point of view, because it's a little bit perhaps provocative, but in the context of this sort of discussion, again, one of the lessons out of COVID-19 pandemic is that there are probably elements of our clinical trial and regulatory approval system which have been developed over the last 40, 50, 60 years that maybe now in the 21st century could use a little bit of rethinking and reform. And Lothar, you referred to a couple. One is, how do we use what is referred to as real world data? But in the vernacular of phase 4, but can we bring that back in to make medicines available once we've understood that, the safety is fine and we begin to understand about efficacy? Is there a way then, the way we've done it with the vaccine, mRNA vaccine, and again, Israel is an interesting example where it's almost, an application of real world data that we bring in. Secondly, as you said, linking it to technology and how do we capture the data and understand it real time. And the third point, which is also reflected in the experience of COVID-19, is and very relevant in today's International Day of Older Persons, in the sense that the developers of mRNA understood that the risk factors for older adults were very particular from COVID-19. And so, whether it was Pfizer, BioNTech, the German biotech company, or Moderna, J&J, they were certain that the number of older people in the trials and in the real world data were greater than we normally perhaps had done in more traditional clinical trials. So whether we're applying the idea of age, risk factor, or this equity issue, which is very relevant here in America where I'm sitting, to ensure that we engage people in the trials themselves. The last point I'll make is thinking back about the 90s, we learned a lot from HIV, where, patients were involved in clinical trials in a way that was probably revolutionary, and I'm not sure we then took that forward to many other therapy areas. So there's a lot of reform that we can live with now in this decade.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to all of you. I think it's really, hopefully some silver lining to come out of the experiences that we had are amazing ideas, amazing innovation, and some changes that will be lasting and hopefully improve the lives of people everywhere. We are now, I think, over time, this has been a really, fantastic and inspiring conversation. We've reached over 3,300 people from countries all around the world. I think from Brazil to Australia have joined us here today. And I want to thank everyone for being with us. I'm really excited and inspired moving forward. And, thank our 3 experts here today for sharing their insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone who joined.